Hi, my name is Kristelle Rizardo. I'm the communications person for the Qalam Institute of the Ateneo de Davao University. And today we're going to be talking about narratives and how storytelling impacts and changes people's lives. So, before anything else, I have given this lecture a few times before during our Empower regional workshops, and I tailored this particular lecture for like a younger college aged audience, so bear with me. Okay, so as the communications person, it's actually very important for us to be able to have stories and storylines and narratives and anecdotes from people on the ground. It makes a lot of the work that we do, especially closer to home, because the Al Qalam Institute, as an Islamic institute, working with Bangsamoro communities, has always been attached to the idea of creating one story or empowering oneself through the creation of storylines, narratives, archetypes. So here we go. I'll start off with my personal story and how I managed to get to Al Kalam in the first place, and my own personal background. A lot of us in the staff really have deeply personal stories as to why they're here. So, as for me, I remember as a child, I was very shy, unlike this video right now. Apart from being shy, I also did not have a lot of friends. I found it very difficult to be able to express myself through any sort of medium. So, since I didn't have anyone to talk to, it was also very difficult for me to be able to find that voice inside me, per se. And then when I was 11, I discovered that I was a decent writer. I was probably 11 years old, and it was very simple actually. It was a journal for my homeroom class, and my advisor just wrote in the notebook. I don't know what happened, but she just wrote in my notebook, "You could be a great writer someday." That completely changed the trajectory of my life and made me want to start writing more. This was also the advent of a lot of social media and a lot of online blogs and websites. So back when there was still a multiply, so that's very revealing of my age, but back when there was still a multiply, I had a multiply blog, and I remember one of my mom's closest friends. Her name is Tina Hansay, and she used to be a reporter for ABS-CBN Regional here in Davao. She happened to read one of my blog posts and then sent it to my mother. My mother replied with, "Oh my god, this piece is so great. Who wrote it?" And then my Tita Tina, to her credit, tried to keep a straight face, but then said, "Christine, that's your kid." Since then, my mom became super supportive of my writing career and decided to send it out to all of her friends. What happened was something that I could have never imagined. Imagine a 12, 13-year old, super shy, super not into talking to people. I got published for the first time at the age of 13 in 2008. My column with the Mindanao Times, the oldest newspaper in Davao City, soon followed, and that became the start of a long love affair with writing and writing my own narratives. And little did I know that it was that act that could have completely changed my life. Little did I know that as much as I loved writing, I also came to depend on it for saving my own life. Around the time that I got my column, my mother was diagnosed with type 2A cervical cancer. Um, After that was a year of chemotherapy and radiation and basically trying to keep it together as a single mom. And then she was in remission for a while. Not soon after her cancer came back, my father was then diagnosed with atypical chronic myelogenous leukemia. So I had two parents fighting cancer as an only child. And then what happened next was probably something that most people cannot even dream of happening to themselves, or it's part of their worst nightmares. My father passed away in June. He had a very adverse reaction to chemotherapy and never woke up. I then turned 15 in the middle of all of this in August. And by December, I lost my mom. So I went from having it all, having just started my column, having managed to pick myself off the ground and have friends for the first time in my life, and everything was going great, and then I lost my entire family. Writing not only became the thing that drove me to not wanting to kill myself, but also drove me to understand how, even though this incredibly horrible series of events happened to me, I was still in control of one thing in my life, and that was how I would react to things and how I want my story to be told. So I continued with my writing career. Yeah. I enrolled into the University of the Philippines, Mindanao. I graduated in 2015. And in 2011, my columns from the Mindanao Times were published in a book entitled Haley Stones. Haley Stones is the name of my former blog and my column. And the subtitle of it is A Journey Through Time, because it was a compilation of everything that I had felt up to that point. So even very personal articles like what I felt like when I lost my dad and when I lost my mom, graduation, getting into UP, these were all things that are in there, and it's very raw. Imagine having your diary entries from when you were 13 or 14 years old published for all of the world to see. So that's something that not a lot of people have, but I have it, and I credit writing really with saving my life. I would not have this life. And eventually, writing gave me the necessary skills and tools that I needed in order to work in a place like Qalam. So this is what I want everyone to know. That's listening to me, that's watching. When it comes to the best stories, the best story that you could ever write for yourself or for other people is the one story that belongs to you, and that's yours. So whatever story it is that you have to tell, whatever narratives that you have in your life that you feel are important, they are valid, and that they are something that everyone should take notice of and listen in themselves. It's sort of like, for example, with a lot of the content that we have on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, a lot of the content that speaks to us is, for example, memes. Meme culture. Meme culture is a very good example of things that sana all, for example. That's a meme. Another one that comes to my mind is pop culture moments that have become defining moments in social media as well, like scenes from Wildflower, like I'm so sorry I'm bringing this up, Wildflower or The Killer Bride or Cadenang Ginto. A lot of that stuff makes it to social media, and we end up relating to a lot of it, like when your best friend refuses to let you copy their homework. Like everyone has had that feeling to some degree. So the fact that they can make something so impersonal in nature, like social media, actually relate and resonate to us already shows that the power of narratives is something that we cannot ignore. It's something that when you see something on the internet that speaks to you, you can't help but share it. So that's something that's valid, and whenever you have that urge, take notice of it. Now, when, for example, you see content like memes that you want to share, or an inspiring video of Greta Thunberg fighting for climate change at 16, you also want to have to think about what makes it so important. The thing that I particularly value, especially not just in today's social media, but also in like influencer culture that's been happening a lot. One of the things that is super important to note is that number one, content is king. The content you produce is everything. This is especially important, especially for people who are vlogging or who are influencers or people we look up to who are very adept at the use of social media. It's the content that we follow. I mean, sure, eventually you can have the best personality, but if you don't have any content that we can view, there's really not much that we can talk about. So, content on social media is something that is very important, and the content of what you have to write, in particular, in whatever medium you choose, whether it's video or whether you write or whether you paint or whether you sing or write music, that's incredibly valid and important. The next part that you all have to imagine is the power of novelty. Oftentimes, why we choose not to share is because we feel like the story has been told a million times. And while that may be true, there are nuances in stories that add, and personal touches that make it particularly, I wouldn't say catchy, because it's not a song, but particularly relatable to other people, or gimmicks as it were. But there's a reason why, there's a website called TV Tropes. There's a reason why that exists, because there are a lot of formulas that you can use and ways that you can hook other people into creating the content that you want, and in the end, creating the story that you want to portray for yourself. So for example, when Oprah Winfrey, back when she still had a talk show, again, this is a really old example, back when she still had a talk show, one of the episodes that have been like one of her most aired episodes has been when she gave away cars to everyone in the audience. What happened was it was actually a paid sponsorship deal, so she wasn't really paying for the cars, and it was a huge marketing gimmick, but who doesn't want a free car? Like, I would totally get a free car if it was given to me. Sure, why not? So, because of that, it grew in notoriety and is still talked about to this day about Oprah giving away free cars. So, you have to ensure that there is that hook that keeps readers there, and that particular hook stands out. The next is you should also know your audience. And by knowing your audience, it should be pretty simple. First of all, the person that we are on Facebook is different from the person that we are on Twitter, and is different from the person we are on Instagram, etc., etc. It's the same way in real life. You're different from this set of friends from high school, and then from this set of friends from college. You can have completely different personalities and inside stories within that particular set of friends. And is a particular set of stories that you can only refer to a particular person or group. So for example, you're not going to post a novel to Twitter because it doesn't allow the character limit anyway. You could, but the threading would be particularly problematic. Or, for example, you wouldn't post an Instagram of yourself on the beach to Tumblr or wherever, because that's just not the audience that you have. So you have to know your audience, and you have to understand and tailor fit your talk or your your novel or your story to fit your audience. Truly great stories do not necessarily need a lot of tweaking. You just sort of have to speak to your audience in a way that can be relatable to them. For example, if I were to speak to my friends, I would not speak the way that I am right now on this video. I would be a lot more informal. I would use a lot more slang terms, and of course code switch from time to time to Tagalog and Bisaya. The next thing that you also have to take note of is your voice. Now, if someone's gonna play this video back to me, I'm probably not going to enjoy it because I don't enjoy the sound of my own voice. However, if you've ever tried to imitate someone like Mariah Carey or Ariana Grande singing, you can't, because their voice are so inimitable that it's just difficult for you not to do that. It's the same with yours. You have to know what sort of voice speaks to you and resonates with you personally. Like, for example, I could never speak for, or I personally feel that I could never personally speak for those who are in conflict areas. I would rather interview them and make sure that their stories are portrayed the way that they want to be portrayed, and then air it out on a medium. I would never claim that story to be mine. Like, I could never claim to understand or to speak for those who suffered under the Marawi siege. As a Moro myself, my father is Tausug, I still sometimes have a difficult time owning up to not just my father's heritage, but of course it's my heritage as well. Owning up to the fact that while I am Moro, while I am Tausug, I was raised in Davao City, in the city. I was educated in private school for most of my life. I was able to go to the best school in the country. Like, well, one of the best schools in the country, that being UP. And so my experience is completely different from a Tausug who was born and raised in Hulo. That's just the reality of my life and the voice that I can give. So while I necessarily do not feel like I can speak for the majority, but I know that I can always speak for myself because I know my voice well enough to know that. And then the next is basically making sure that the content and the stories that we create are also relevant to the times. For example, earlier this morning, there was a climate change rally that took place at Freedom Park in Ross Avenue here in Davao City, right outside the Ateneo de Davao, like right outside the gate here. That was inspired by recent events, given that Greta Thunberg spoke to the United Nations about her anger and her sense of panic and sadness and rage at the fact that no one has ever really given any concrete solutions to climate change. That basically kickstarted an entire wave of sympathy and sometimes trolls, because you can't really help it. There are trolls. But the thing is, it's completely relevant because it's what's happening to the world. You also have to consider that it is vital that we are timely in the information that we give out, because information now is so fast-paced. Back then, it could take weeks for you to hear from a relative in, like, Luzon, for example, because there wasn't any phones or there wasn't a lot of ways for you to communicate. You could just write, and you have to wait for the letter to arrive on your doorstep. However, now it's not the case. With new sources of media, it's become very easy for stories to spread in seconds. For example, like Insta stories, where you can just air events as it's happening. We have the accessibility of social media on our mobile phones. That has made it incredible. Where were we? So, you have to ensure that a lot of what you produce is timely. So, like with what's happening with Greta Thunberg and trolls, that's something that you have to consider as well, because of course when you produce something fresh and new, there will be people who will push back at the message that you're trying to share. But that just makes it all the more important for you to share it, especially when Greta was able to express that and people told her to smile. I don't think that would be super appropriate for her to smile while delivering a message describing the urgency of climate change, for example. So that's something you have to look at and sort of ascertain for yourself the timeliness of the message that you're trying to pursue, especially when you're in the development world and when you have an advocacy. Now, there are a few stories that I would really honestly want to share. For example, especially because we're coming from my office, which is the Bangsamoro, and then honestly, part of the reason why a lot of people have heard stories about Mindanao being a conflict zone are not necessarily the case. People from Manila or from Manila, I'm saying, or the Luzon area or in Visayas have never been to Mindanao, don't necessarily know what's happening here on the ground. So unless you really ask people, you don't really know that there are actually, for example, people who are Moro but are also privileged in the fact that they can get to go to school in the Ateneo de Davao. I believe there is already a lot of Moros who are here. They have formed organizations like Salam, the Ateneo Muslim Society, similar to Xavier University Siraj. And then I also come to mind, we also had, like, last year, 2018, we had what we called the Empower Awards, which was during the M Summit, 2018, where we awarded 3 outstanding Moro youth. So that was Haidar Alonto for school-based youth from Xavier University. There was Namera Ambor from the Coalition of Moro Youth Movement from Marawi. And then from Cotabato, it was Rex Alon for the professional-based youth. And now also part of the Development Academy of the Bangsamoro, if I'm not mistaken. So, these are Moro youths who have contributed a lot to the state of the Ummah, or the community. It's just so sad that these stories were not necessarily are not necessarily being given attention to in social media or whatever. Mostly because the people who should write stories of the Bangsamoro or of the Lumad or of marginalized communities, the best stories come from those communities. Moro writers should write to and for Moro writers. That's the only way you can really get the best kinds of stories. I would actually, in my original lecture, I showed a few videos from social media, but I don't know how I'm going to be able to do this in this case. Hopefully someone's going to manage to, like, figure out how to do it. But we have, you should all watch this short video called Ellipsis. It's, okay, so where were we? It's a video called Ellipsis, and it's on Vincentiments, and you should watch it if you have time, because it's something that's really good at, apart from the storyline itself, it's also effective in messaging and the usage of content, so you also check it out. But as I said, in my case, the best stories come from here, from you. Moral writers can and should always write for moral writers, because who else is going to write for them? Lumad IP writers, same thing. This is because part of what we identify with and part of what we want to change about our societies is very much reflected in the content that we view every day, especially on social media. It doesn't matter if it's through memes or if it's through short stories, songs. If you really want something to change about how we view people, how we view narratives, how we take in narratives and listen to them, how we listen to the marginalized, to women, to PWDs, to the LGBT, to other marginalized communities. If you are a member of those communities, please, 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 share your story. You never know who you're going to end up helping. I hope by listening to me, it affects somebody to write their own story and see how effective it was for me and how it changed my life. So I'd like to thank Equal Access for the opportunity to be able to share this lecture, if you can call it that, to everyone here. And also thanks to Adam Anay for reaching out. So thank you, and that's all. Thank you.